Welcome to Hitting Home. I'm your host, Megan Driscoll.
And I'm Becky Coletta.
And we are here to break down how decisions in D.C. affect our local communities.
Because all politics are local politics.
Welcome to Hitting Home. I'm here with my friend Becky. Hey, Becky.
Hey, Megan.
We're at it again.
We are.
Talking about how national politics affect us here locally. And today we're going to talk about taxes.
Oh, wow.
Which is so boring. Actually, we're going to try to make it not boring.
We're going to try.
Okay, that's going to be the overarching goal.
We're going to try to have our show notes have some of the boring stuff. Exactly. So the House of Representatives just passed their budget proposal. And this is kind of the background for how we're going to talk about how Trump's administration thinks about taxes and is talking about it. It's $2 trillion in spending cuts. It's $4.5 trillion in spending basically over the course of time for tax cuts. It's going to raise the debt ceiling by $4 trillion. But he is touting in here these cuts are essentially going to pay to cut your taxes. And I think when you get into the details, and what we're learning is that when Donald Trump says you're getting a tax cut, he means that. It's just not really for you, right? It's for such a small group of people, and that's what we're going to get into today. So he means it. People are getting a tax cut. It's just not anybody that I know. Right.
It doesn't apply to them. So tell me a little bit about, why don't you talk a little bit about what is in the tax proposal?
And this kind of goes back to sort of some of what he was talking about before he was elected and some of what they're talking about now. So the biggest piece of it is in 2017, there were tax cuts, right? And those tax cuts largely went to the wealthy. But there were tax cuts. Those are due to expire at the end of 2025 if nothing happens. So a big part of this is to make those tax cuts permanent. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece of it is to also deal with some of the deduction issues, the state and local tax cap. This goes to how much of your state and local taxes can be deducted from your income taxes, from your federal income taxes. It also has some more technical issues with regard to corporate tax deductions that, again, help the wealthy more than they help the rest of us. And then more recently, we have the tariffs piled on top of that.
Yeah.
But
even if we take the tariffs out of it, I mean, I've seen some of the numbers with regard to the tax debt or how the tax cuts will actually affect the certain populations of people. There's a great graph. I think we're going to have a link to it in the show
We'll have
notes.
a link to it. Yeah.
Which basically shows how the bottom 20, 40. 50, 60% actually lose money in the tax cuts when you add on the tariffs.
Add on the tariffs.
Yeah,
but even without the tariffs.
Without the tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking here, like the poorest 20% would save $140 a year. The fourth 20%, and we're talking about people who are making around $150,000 a year, are going to save around maybe $3,200 a year before the tariffs kick in.
Yeah.
Once the tariffs kick in, they're losing money.
Yeah.
The wealthiest,
5%.
5%. So the wealthiest, the 4% are getting $20,000 a year back.
Yeah.
In cuts.
Well, that's
the richest 1%, it's more like $80,000 a year.
Yeah. I mean, when
and that's without a ton of tax planning.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. When he says I'm offering tax cuts, he's offering it to the top 5%, and it's on the backs of the bottom 95%, essentially. Because when you add in the tariffs, almost every category of person loses money except for the wealthiest 5%.
Right. So when they're slashing federal services and Medicaid or education or firing people willy-nilly, it's about looking like you're saving a ton of money, not really saving any more than the inspectors general would have saved, probably less.
Yeah.
Getting the inspectors general from looking at programs that their friends were getting investigated by, and then taking what little savings they come up with, or what big savings they do if they slash Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, and they're giving it to the wealthy who don't need it.
Right.
I mean, if anything in this country, we see a growing gap between the poor, the middle class, and the wealthy.
Yeah,
And
we have a wealth gap. We have a wealth gap problem.
We have a huge wealth gap problem, and this only makes it worse. But you know, when we take it down to the state level, we look at the fact that in Massachusetts, the average tax change is going to be very minuscule. And if we look at it, there's about 2.75 million households in Massachusetts. So you figure there's about 550,000 households in each bracket of 20%. So most of these analyses of these tax cuts break it down into 20%.
By earnings.
Yeah.
Like up to 30,000,
Quintiles.
between 30 and 60,000,
Right.
between 60,000 and 100, yeah.
So in Massachusetts, the poorest 20% earn less than 32,000. The second 20% earn between 32 and 67,000. The third 20% earn between 67,000 and 117,000. And the fourth 20% make between 117,000 and, oh geez, I can't read that one, 187. And then the next 15% are 187 to 487. So when we're talking about the 4% and the 1%, we're talking about 467 to 1.2 million, and the richest 1% make more than 1.2 million a year.
Annually, yeah.
Annually.
Yeah.
Right? So when we're talking about people say, well, I'm doing better, I might get a bigger tax break. Are you really in that range of 467 to 1.2 million?
Yeah, so I think
that's
that,
the top 5% we're talking about.
Yeah, I think the people that what people need to know, I think in Massachusetts is unless you make over $400,000 a year, if you take any, if we just did the tax breaks, we looked at them alone, right? Mm-hmm. If you add anything onto there, like tariffs, maybe not even at 20%, or the slashing of Medicaid or anything, every single person except for the top 5% will actually be paying more.
Yep. So
but the 5% will never be paying more.
So we have that in the show. We'll have that in the show notes. So like, let's take a woman who makes $50,000, has 2 kids, single mom.
Which I can't even imagine how you can live in Massachusetts on $50,000 with 2 kids. But yes, I agree. There are people doing it. It's hard.
People have to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it.
And that's a mom who's probably kids are on Medicaid or Mass Health.
They're a little bit too wealthy for Mass Health, but they're getting help from the Affordable Care Act.
Mm-hmm, okay.
And so they're paying a lot less for insurance. She'll get maybe $500 a year in tax relief from the...
Before the tariffs.
But because she has to spend all of her income to survive every month,
yeah,
the tariffs hit all of her income, not just a piece of her income, right?
Right.
Because she's, let's say, because she's, the wealthier are able to take some of that money and save it. Someone who's making $50,000 a year with 2 kids is unlikely to be saving much in Massachusetts.
No, they're using all of their income for their rent and utilities and food and yes.
And things like avocados that are going to go up with tariffs.
Well, I don't think she's going to be able to have avocados anymore.
So the taxes and tariffs will cost her about $1,400 a year.
Yeah. So her savings, if you looked at the tax breaks that he's offering to the public with his tax plan, she would be saving how much?
$500.
Okay. And if these tariffs go into place,
she would lose, between all the tax cuts, she would be paying an extra $1,400 a year.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when you take a 2-earner family, and we say, okay, let's say it's a younger nurse and a firefighter, they have 2 incomes, they have 2 kids, they make about $150,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So they might save somewhere between $1,400 and $3,200, depending on a lot of different
annually
factors.
On taxes.
Annually on taxes. And it also depends on whether or not, because part of what the new plan would do in addition to making permanent tax cuts is to make certain categories of income like Social Security, overtime, and tips not subject to federal income tax. So if, depending on where some of that money comes from, they might get a slightly bigger tax break. Note, this is really not taxes that aren't going to expire. So when you really look at it, you're still going to, you're not going to see that much savings, right? Because a lot of those savings are already built into the tax code you've gotten used to since 2017.
Right.
So when we say saving, we're talking about, your taxes aren't going to go up.
Your taxes aren't going to go up. They're going to stay the same.
But with tariffs, because again, at $150,000 a year with 2 kids and housing costs being what they are, you're spending a lot of your money on things that are impacted by tariffs. So the predictions, and again, it'll be in our show notes resources to look at this yourself, they're going to have about an $1,800 net increase in overall tax impact.
Yeah. But even if the tariffs don't go through, which again, this has just been I feel like it's every day.
It's a roller coaster.
It's a roller coaster. And actually, to say at this point that there's some strategy behind this, I think is just, if people are still believing that, then I think that's silly, because he literally does not know which way he wants to go. He's being pressured by business to call off the tariff, so then he's changing it, and then he's going back to his original position and putting the tariffs back in. This is really about a push and pull, and he really doesn't know what direction he's going in.
And sometimes it's how he feels on a certain day.
True. But the problem is that the implications of the threat of those tariffs have already taken hold.
Right.
So we have countries changing the way they're doing business with the United States in preparation for, and then sometimes just because they're mad.
Right.
So like Canada's like,
this is existential threat.
I am taking your alcohol off my shelves. Though.
Right.
I'm doing that immediately.
Right.
I'm encouraging people in Canada not to buy American goods. So whether or not the tariffs...
And I'm not going to depend on you anymore, right?
Well, right. And whether the tariffs go through or not, it doesn't matter, because some of those changes have already been made. So we are going to see an increase in costs. We're already seeing an increase in costs. Our inflation, I just looked at the GDP growth for the United States. So we were on a trajectory to gain possibly 3 points GDP in the first quarter of 2025. And now they're predicting a negative 3%.
So GDP is gross domestic product. That is all of the...
It's our income, our revenue.
As a country,
yes.
All the businesses in the country.
Yeah.
So here we have this young family, $150,000, nurse and firefighter. They're going to lose money overall from these tax impacts.
Yeah.
So all of the DOGE stuff, the slash and burn, it's not saving them money.
No.
And
you could argue that it's actually going to be costing us money in the long run.
Well,
that's
because
kind of the problem.
We've talked about in other shows, if we lose education dollars, they're probably going to be paying more for local property taxes. If health insurance premiums go up, their local property taxes will go up. Their health insurance premium and their share of health insurance premiums may go up. So it's going to cost them money. They're going to possibly be called upon to do more care for people in their family who are sick or elderly.
With the slashing of Medicaid.
With the slashing of Medicaid.
Yeah.
So they're going to lose from the slashing, and they're not going to gain anything from the taxes. So it's a big bait and switch. But I
have to say, though, and I think the point to hit home here is we're talking about 95% of the state will fall into this category, where the tax benefit to you will not outweigh the slashing of federal funding that's going to hurt your pocketbook in other ways, and the tariffs.
Yeah, it might be more like 70 or 80% of our state, but that's the middle class.
And if we're talking about 15 or 20%, it's really not going to affect them at all. And if anything, they actually will receive a massive tax cut, and they will actually see money, actual dollars in their pocket.
Lots of dollars.
Exactly.
Right.
It's the sneakiest, largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich that I have seen in my lifetime. If it is to go forward, and we believe that it could, unless there's massive pushback against not only the spending bill, the budget proposal, but these cuts to Medicaid and cuts to these other federal funds.
Right. Well, and so let's go to the person who makes $1 million a year. So their federal tax cuts, just based on the tax cuts, are going to be somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000.
And this is like 1% of Massachusetts.
No, it's 5%.
Make $1 million?
No, it's about 3% that make $1 million.
Okay.
Because the top 1% makes $1.2 million.
Right.
A year.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So, and these numbers move from year to year, and you look at one website, they're using 1 year's dollars versus another year's dollars. But we're roughing it here because we're trying to look at what the broader impact is, if you want to get down to the fine tooth, you go to the sources we're going to put down in our show notes. So this person who makes $1 million a year, he's going to get, he or she, because there are women making...
Or just family. It's a family.
It's a family. $50,000 to $80,000 in tax cuts. With tariffs, they probably are going to spend more money and spend more of that. So maybe they end up only getting a cut of about $36,000 after tariffs.
Yeah.
But that's $36,000 for a family already making $1 million a year, whereas the firefighter and the nurse are having an $1,800 net increase.
In costs.
In costs.
Yeah, exactly.
In tax impact.
Yeah.
And the mom, who's only making $50,000 a year and barely staying alive, $1,400 a year.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, $50,000 a year is well above minimum wage.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Don't even get me started on that. Don't even get me started on that.
So we're looking more at the middle class, and we're looking at, people in true poverty.
Yeah. Do you know, this is related and unrelated maybe, but I just watched a show and I was just blown away. I forget the guy's name. I'm going to put in the show notes a link to his book he just wrote. It's about the transfer of wealth.
Yeah.
And he talked about if the top 1% just paid the taxes that they are due,
Right, because
this is not new, not doing anything new, not increasing in taxes. If we just got the 1% to actually pay the taxes that are due, we could end poverty. We could lift the entire country out of poverty.
And kids wouldn't go hungry, and they would have medical care, and they would have good
Exactly.
schools.
I'm going to link to the show notes for this book because I'm buying it and I'll be reading it on vacation because I find this fascinating. And this is not even with new tax change, but this tax proposal is going to make the problem even worse.
Well,
because it's benefiting the rich.
Well, and when we look at wealth inequality,
yeah,
not just income inequality, but wealth inequality.
Yeah.
As interest rates as the marginal top tax rate went down, wealth inequality grew.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the statistics over wealth inequality, they've grown over the course of the last, 20 years. You've seen an absolute shift.
So the last time we had taxes this low for top tax earners was in the late 1920s, right before the Depression.
Yeah.
Then as we went into the war years, we paid for the war with huge tax increases, where the top 0.1% were making, were paying 90% of their income. And it was just all going to fund the war. And after the war, in the 50s and 60s, the marginal tax rate was still between 60 and 70%. So a lot of times during that period, there wasn't such a big gap in income or wealth between the CEO and the lowest paid worker.
Right.
Right? And in part because if you gave extra money to your CEO, you're now paying 60 cents or 70 cents on the dollar to the federal government. So it would be better to invest it in your company, invest it in training, invest it in research, invest it in your workers.
In your workers, yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because
you'd actually save money.
You would save money and you would build a better business, right? And so when we think of the heyday and the growth of our country, where we were building our infrastructure and we were booming and we were becoming such a powerful economy, that was the 50s, 60s, 70s when tax rates were higher. Then we developed this idea of the trickle-down theory with Ronald Reagan, right? And taxes dropped precipitously down to 40% as a top tax rate from a high of close to 70%.
Right.
I think it was 67. I don't have the exact number here. And then you see the wealth share zoom up.
Yeah. Well, it's a complete cross. So in the 1980s, you see a complete cross from the tax rate drops, the wealth share split rises.
Right.
And so again, it's an obvious indication, and it just shows you that we're having a complete transfer of wealth.
And the idea was that you would pay workers more, but as we lost union membership, and as we, people realized the more they made, the more they got to keep,
Well, this idea
didn't
that
go up.
Yeah,
except for
pay the
CEOs.
wealthy more, and they'll spend the money and they'll share the wealth. They don't do that. That's proven. They don't do that. That doesn't happen.
Well, it doesn't translate to higher wages for the middle class. It doesn't translate to more wealth for the middle class. It translates into higher wages and more wealth for the top wage earners in our country.
Exactly.
And so,
and countries in general don't do well when you have a wealth gap of this size, right? No. You are headed for the place where we are now, really, honestly. We're headed for just a real class wealth division like we've never seen.
Not since the Depression.
What's interesting to me about this, though, is that it appears that the people who want this administration's policies the most are the ones most affected negatively by the policies themselves. And that's where the disconnect is I can't understand.
So I keep saying that where we see fraud, the Trump's talking point is fraud, waste, and abuse. It's on like a loop, right? Fraud, waste, and abuse, fraud, waste, and abuse.
Right.
But the fraud I'm seeing is the fraud on the American people by the Trump administration when it puts forth these policies with their talking points.
Yeah. Well, and I think fraud, waste, and abuse is a nice way of tricking people into thinking that they're losing something, and look over here at this fraud, waste, and abuse in the government, while I put in a policy under that name, but that policy hurts you.
Hurts you so badly.
And when he says, I keep going back to this, when he says tax breaks, he means it.
Right.
But what he means it for is the top 5%. The top 5% are the people who are going to really benefit from this tax plan. And so if I was in the bottom 95%, I would be calculating very carefully how his tax plan affects me and then balancing that against the increase in costs that we're seeing without the tariffs being put in place yet, without Medicaid even being cut. We're seeing the stock market fall precipitously. We're seeing inflation
or
rise.
At least it's on a roller coaster.
We're seeing GDP estimates going down. The jobs report just came out. We're seeing economic recession.
We haven't seen the half of it.
Yeah, we're looking towards heading into a recession. And on top of that, we have these tax breaks for the rich.
So my dad and my uncle grew up really, really poor. And then they did pretty well for themselves for two kids who didn't graduate from high school and got their GEDs. But their joke used to be, the poor are getting rich off of you.
Yeah, it's true, right?
And that was their joke, because of course the poor aren't getting rich. The rich are getting rich.
Yeah.
And I just don't know why people buy it.
I know. Why are people siding with Elon Musk that they have nothing in common with? Is that Elon Musk, as a billionaire who clearly has his self-interests in mind, how can anyone see themselves in that? I don't understand. I just don't understand it.
I don't get it either.
Yeah. And I personally probably benefit from some. I'm not on Mess Health. I don't have, I'm not going to be in a situation where
you built your business. I'm
in a good position financially.
You're in a good position financially.
And I am screaming to people that this is just so unfair for every single friend and family member I have, that this is not going to work for you.
Well, in Massachusetts, I do want to spend 2 minutes talking about state and local taxes.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's one area where federally they're talking about getting rid of the cap on state and local taxes, which was seen as a big hit against New York, Massachusetts, California, the states that spend a lot of money. They do really well on outcomes like medical care,
number one in education. Yeah.
All of these businesses thrive in these states.
Yep.
So when the cap went in, we were like, oh, geez, that's really going to hurt our ability, because property taxes now aren't, people aren't going to itemize because they increase the standard deduction. But so you're going to end up with more pressure in our states not to tax, because people can no longer deduct all of those taxes from their federal income tax. And keep in mind, the state and local tax exemption goes back to the first income tax in the late 1800s. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening here is that it does impact us negatively. But on the other hand, the reason why he wants to eliminate the cap is not to help blue states like Massachusetts. It's because, again, it hugely benefits the wealthy, who have much bigger property taxes, much bigger income taxes paid at the state level. And so it really is pressure coming from people, even people like you have a Republican congressman in upstate New York who they need because they can't lose any Republican votes on this.
Right.
And they're saying, get rid of the cap. It's going to, again, be a wealth transfer to the wealthy.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to not want it because it helps a blue state be able to tax appropriately to provide the services that I'm happy we're able to provide here. But it's a little bit, watch the SALT exemption, SALT, state and local tax. Watch that exemption, watch that cap, pay attention to it because it'll affect us here in Massachusetts, but it also is, again, part of this, at the end of the day, really focusing on how do we give more money and more tax breaks to the wealthy who already are paying such a smaller percentage of their income. And the other thing, we're talking about Social Security. Can we save Social Security? The Social Security stops. That tax, payroll tax, stops at $167,000 a year. So if you're making $1 million a year, most of your income is not subject to that Social Security tax.
Right.
We could save Social Security and grow it and make it stronger if we took away that cap.
Yeah. Well, I think
it would be fairer to everybody.
Yeah. I think the message here today is that I hope you don't believe the sort of the words that are being said about fraud, waste, and abuse, and you actually kind of like look underneath the hood to what that actually means as it relates to your taxes and what you pay. We're gonna, in the show notes, put a direct link where you can figure out where you sit in Massachusetts and kind of do the math for yourself. And we would love to hear back from you. So we would like to know where you sit, what this means to you, and what your concerns are, because I think this is, again, the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich that I've seen in my lifetime. And it could be devastating to our bottom 60, which again are our firefighters, there are nurses, there are teachers, there are single moms, there are struggling families, there are young people who are just starting out. So this has wide-ranging effects. So please do that, let us know. And again, we will continue to bring you sort of bigger topics, complex topics, try to break them down so you've understood them. Please let us know if we're doing that effectively. And thanks for watching.